So we want to move now into the small room conversation. So we're going to take the group. We're going to split you in small groups in breakout rooms, and you will be connected with one or two other people. And we're going to have a conversation in the small groups. And the question we're going to put up here, and the question will be posed by our speaker, Colin Ryan. So Colin, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and then maybe you can start sharing your screen and you can put the question up here for everyone. And then Charmaine, you can take us to the breakout rooms. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I just want to correct something that Jessica said earlier. When Jessica said we have Colin Ryan, an expert, I need to upfront let you know that I'm no expert in gender or gender-based violence, but I do have some experience around having worked and done some training around gender and gender-based violence. So Jessica, I just need to correct that upfront and let everybody know I don't claim to be an expert. So, but that's fine. I think what I'd first like for us to do, and Non-Frankla, you said you would organize the small groups. I think I just want to know, and I mean, I like the poll, but I didn't know you were going to do it, where you told us a little bit about who's in the room. But I think it's going to be quite important for me to just understand. So I just got these two questions just initially. So your name, where you from, and what you want to take away from this discussion today. And then when you think of GBV, what baffles you the most? Or what is the most difficult part to understand about how to reduce GBV? If you're thinking about doing some work around GBV, and what do you think are the most difficult things, then that's what I need to just understand from you. So can we just organize those breakaway rooms? And then I think you said we've got about 25 people in the room.
Yeah, we're now 29, so
29 to 50. Yes. So yeah. You will work out how the breakaway rooms are going to work?
Yes, no, that's fine. The ladies in the background will sort it out for us. Thank you.
Okay, so if we can just take, how long do we want to take for this? 10 minutes or 5 minutes?
I'll think, let's give everyone 5 minutes. If there's an indication that they need a little bit more time, then we can always,
okay, that's fine. Because I must also just say that an hour and a half is not a lot of time. So because we've got such a limited amount of time, I just want to gauge what is it that you want to take away, and I'll see how I can cut some of the presentation, because I've tried pretty much to pack in as much as I can, but with the hope that I'll cover everything that I think you might want to know. So if that's okay with everybody. So 5 minutes, that's fine. Just to answer those two questions, and these questions will be up on the screen. Thank you.
Are we in one room?
Hi there, shall we start speaking?
Hi, Sarah. Hello.
Okay, so yeah, my name is Sharon Inkerman. I'm a grade 7 teacher and a member of management at a school called Turfel Primary in Cape Town. I think really what I want to take away from this session is being able to recognize the invisible forms that GBV takes, because I think we're so conscious of the visible forms of GBV. I'd like to take away what it is that we're missing and the things that we're allowing to seep through the cracks.
It's Maureen speaking. You know, in the question, there's a part that says, like when you think about GBV, what baffles you, and so on, and then it says what is difficult to understand about how to reduce GBV. Is that correctly written to say reduce?
Yes, that's correct.
No, just explain to me.
We will take that comment into the big room when we have a bigger room conversation, and then we ask Colleen to unpack it for us. Okay.
Yeah, to what we mean by say reduce. But I think what baffles me is the fact that we still don't want to accept the space of GBVs in our lifetime or life communities. So what I want to take away from this session is to have a deeper understanding and the knowledge to deal with this, because we deal with these things from time to time in schools, and often we don't understand. We think it's behavior that is unacceptable.
Thanks. So the question was, when do you think gender-based violence, or what baffles you about it most? We have so much talk around gender-based violence. We see it on TV, we see it in the news. Some of us experience it at home within our schools, and yet it continues to become worse and worse and worse. And it's soul destroying to switch on your TV, to open your newspaper and to see yet another child or woman has been attacked or murdered. And it feels so frustrating as to what can be done. And from my point of view as an educator in a primary school, how do I go about educating our young boys and girls, both of them, to understand the severity of this situation? We know that some of them live with us every day. And like I just said now in our breakaway room, children see violence and they grow up with understanding that this is probably the norm. How do we undo that in that 6 hours that we spend with those children? How do we create awareness around it? So that is what baffles me and what worries me constantly.
Anybody else want to add anything, or can I just continue? I think I'll just continue because I'm getting the gist of what people are. And I think I posed that question deliberately because I do think that there are many frustrations around GBV. And even myself, I mean, I work in the minister's office and we go around helping people understand gender-based violence and what we are doing in the DSD, but it's really a problem that's ongoing. And the president spoke about the pandemic. And I think the question that I was asked was, how do we nurture a generation of young people in our schools who love and respect one another? And it's quite a heavy question because it's not quite so easy. So what I did feel that it's important, and because you are educators and because you're working in the school environment, and there may be some learners, that I felt it's important to just give you a broad understanding of the national strategic plan, because everybody talks about this national strategic plan on GBV, and also just looking at what the Western Cape government is doing. Because I think that if we're sitting in our houses and we're watching the television, you almost feel like the problem is insurmountable and it's overwhelming. But if you actually can understand it, then we can start breaking it down and looking what can be practically done. And I think that that's what we're all struggling with. And it's not going to be an easy, simple task, of that I'm sure. But I do think that if we start thinking about it differently and start working differently amongst ourselves, then that would be a start. So can I continue?
Yes, you're welcome.
Okay, sorry. So what I want to do is I just want to give you an overview of what I will be talking about. So I'm going to be talking some of the time, but I am going to also engage and have some group sessions where I would like you to just think a little bit more deeply. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give a broad overview of the work that we're doing around GBV, but then also how we got to this place of the GBV, the NSP and the actual strategic plan. And then I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what this vision and purpose of this plan is, because I think it's important that we all, you know what, we're sitting in the office and we got all these documents, but if the people on the ground and if the people that's doing the work and working with the learners and engaging with the parents don't understand how they fit into this big puzzle, then it almost feels like it's going to come to naught. And I think it's really important that with this big document that we all start to take ownership of it. And that's why I felt it's important to share. The National Strategic Plan has 6 pillars, and so I'll share that with you. And that will also help. But then also we can't look at it without having some context around why we're sitting with this huge problem of GBV. And then I think I heard somebody in one of the groups, they said they want to get a better understanding around what GBV is, the invisible forms of GBV. And there are very many. I mean, it's not just physical abuse where you can see a blue eye or killing somebody. So I just want to briefly touch on that a little bit to give some context as well. And then there's a community that people are not talking very much about, but it's very real. And that is understanding the LGBTQIA+ community. So I'm just going to briefly talk about that. Then I'm going to talk about the Western Cape government's plan. And I hear that we've got other provinces in the room, but I don't know what the other provinces are doing, but I can just share with you what the Western Cape government is doing in terms of how they're moving forward. And I think it's also foolhardy to think that we're going to be working in our schools or we're going to be working in DSD without looking at how it fits into the Western Cape government's bigger plan, because we can't be working in isolation any longer. And I think that this forum is particularly interesting because I know Symphony does lots of work with business leaders and school principals. So it's about forming partnerships and about working differently. And then lastly, I want to talk about how do we nurture the generation of young people. And I don't think that I have all the answers. I mean, I absolutely know I don't have all the answers, but I do think that when we have these kinds of engagements and discussions and conversations is when we'll start to think a little bit more deeply about what we can be doing in our spaces to make the problem. And I heard somebody asking, did she say reduce GBV? I mean, I think that's what we all want. We want to see a reduction. We'd like to see no gender-based violence, but a start would be to see it being reduced, not on the increase as we're presently seeing it. Okay, so we know that gender-based violence is a gross human violation, and the levels of it's alarming. But I also just want to say that in the Western Cape government, Minister Fernandez in 2019 said that you cannot do the 16 days of activism because this 16 days means absolutely nothing. We hear about murders all the time during those 16 days, and that the campaign, so what I want to focus on is that the campaign should be for 365 days. So there's not any one day where we must think that we don't need to worry about it. It's not November, December, where we must think about 16 days. We need to think about it every single day. And the National Strategic Plan was launched in April 2020 in response to the escalating GBV levels. And I just put this slide up because I think that this is going to be pertinent for the rest of my conversation, in that the only constant is change. And I think that we don't recognize it always because we'd like things to stay the same and stay the way they are, the way that we know and feel comfortable with. But things are changing all the time. And so it's in these uncomfortable spaces that we need to start engaging. I just want to also give you an overview that how GBV got started. There were 24 demands by cis women, trans women, and gender non-conforming people. And then the president had a summit, and that was held in 2019, where 400 organizations were represented. They formed an interim steering committee, they refined it, and then they came up with what we know now as the NSP. So just to say that this hasn't been something that somebody just woke up, it has been something based on demands that were started some time ago. So the vision of the National Strategic Plan is that we want a South Africa free from GBV, directed at women, children, and the LGBTQIA+ persons. Now, I just want to ask anybody to answer me. Do you know what that whole acronym LGBTQIA+ stands for? Anybody want to take a stab at it?
I would like to
Yes.
try.
lesbian,
Please do.
lesbian, gay, bisexual,
Okay. Anyone?
LGBT.
So lesbian, gay, bisexual, intersex, queer, and asexual.
Yeah, but
And the T?
Transsexual, sorry.
Yeah, transgender.
Transgender, sorry.
Yeah.
That's very offensive of me, and I
Transgender.
would like to apologize. Transsexual is actually a very offensive term now. The accepted one is transgender. I'm sorry about that.
No problem. Q, I, A. A, did you say A?
Yes, asexual, I think is it queer and intersex?
That's right, queer, intersex, and asexual. And then there's the plus. Now, you know something, and I'm being absolutely honest, all I can do is be myself. But the first, I did gender training years ago, and then I came back now a few years ago, and I did it again. And then I saw LGBTQIA plus, and somebody said to me, Colin, what does the plus stand for? And truthfully, I didn't know, because I mean, the last time I did this training, I probably stopped at the Q. And that's why I put that slide up, that the only constant is change. Because I think we need to recognize that things are changing and people are, we're not all
We can't
thinking-
see the slide.
The slides, yes.
I never touched the thing. I'm looking at the slide.
You're not sharing the slides.
You're not
It's
sharing.
being shared.
Can't see it.
Let me just get back to you on that one quickly. Something's not right here. Just give me a second. Just give me 1 second. I'm trying to work this out. I don't even know where to share it. Just give me a second. Can you see it?
Yes.
There we go.
Okay. All right. So I think it's very important for us to recognize that we don't know all the details, and it's important that we start just understanding things differently. So the purpose of the NSP, somebody's hand is up. Jessica, your hand is up.
And I wanted to make a comment, sorry, about the slides that is not visible.
Oh, okay. So the purpose of the NSP is to provide a multi-sectoral, coherent, strategic policy and programming framework. And it focuses on comprehensively and strategically responding to GBV and femicide. So these are the 6 pillars, and I think that this is quite important for us to think through, because this is going to inform what we do and how we do it, and whether we can do it differently. Okay, so pillar 1 talks about accountability, coordination, and leadership. And I think that that becomes quite important, is that in a lot of the time, in a lot of the work that's being seen, very few people are being held accountable for what's happening. Look at pillar 4, pillar 3, you'll see justice, safety and protection, and that would involve SAPs, it would involve the courts. And a lot of the time, they are not being held accountable for inefficiencies and things that are not being done that's supposed to be done. So it's looking at how we can be more accountable, how there can be improved coordination, and how we can have a better almost cadre of leadership, because it's the leadership. If people are not taking something seriously, we're not going to see movement. So that's the pillar 1. Pillar 2 talks about prevention and building social cohesion. So it's all good and well to say we want to do prevention and we want to build social cohesion, but the context is quite complex, and I'll share that a little bit later. But so that's pillar 2, looking at how do we do prevention work. Pillar 3 talks about justice, safety and protection, and that looks at the courts, that looks at the SAPs, and it looks at what is being done in those spaces when women go to report those GBV cases. And then pillar 4 talks about response, care, support and healing. And in the DSD, that's quite a lot of where the work is focused, because we have, in fact, Patricia de Lille as the Public Works Minister just gave us 6 houses, and that we've just opened up 6 brand new shelters now. So that's where a lot of where our work comes in terms of the response, the care, the support and helping to heal. Then here's a pillar that we almost seem to exclude and we don't think about too deeply, But a large part of the problem is that women stay in abusive relationships and stay in abusive situations because they feel they have nowhere else to go. So that's part of where the shelters come in, but we need some economic power. And that is an area that has been quite overlooked, and it's something that we need to be working on a lot more intensively. And then pillar 6, and this is something that we also take for granted. You as educators and principals, you are sitting almost at the coalface and you understand the issues, you know exactly what's going on. And sometimes it's the things that you see and experience that becomes the real research. And sometimes what is experienced is not necessarily, then the latest buzzwords are evidence-led and data-informed. And so I think that we're sitting with rich data and we need to look at how do we take all of that and how do we manage all the data and the research that we are presently sitting with. So if you look across the 6 pillars, you'll see we talk about accountability, we talk about responsiveness, and we also look at prevention. So that is what the 6 pillars of the NSP is hoping to achieve, that we want to be responsive, we want to be accountable, but we also want to work at how do we prevent the scourge of gender-based violence. Then they talk about harnessing all to respond to the crisis, and that's where the coordination will come in, because it can't just be the educators and it can't just be the principal. It might be some businesses in the area. It needs to be SAPs, it needs to be the courts. Everybody needs to be talking to each other. They talk about addressing the structural drivers of GBV, and we want to stop it before it happens, and to enforce, implement, and adopt laws and policies. So it's about how do we make sure, I mean, just an example is that SAPs, they're supposed to have trauma rooms. So somebody's supposed to, if they experience any, maybe a rape, then they should be able to go to a trauma room. And in some cases, you'll hear somebody tell me when I go to perhaps in one of the rural communities, they'll say, no, but the station commander uses that room to sleep in, so we can't even use it. So there are very many things that's not working well. And then in other police stations, they are working really well. So it's about how do we connect all the dots to make sure that everybody's doing what they're supposed to be doing. The other side there talks about providing victim-centered, survivor-focused, accessible, quality services. So I think that a large part of what the NSP is hoping to do in order to reduce GBV is to make sure that everything is working, and that presently isn't. I spoke earlier a little bit and I said we need to give some context. So we also can't just look at GBV in isolation and think all men are bad. So to the men that's in this room today, I need you to understand that Minister in the office, we've actually made a priority to start focusing on working with men and boys, because men and boys never just woke up. I mean, a man never just woke up this one morning and decided today I'm going to throw petrol over my girlfriend or wife and I'm just going to kill her. I think there must have been some serious trauma that has happened in that man's life that has led him to a place to be like that. So we're not saying that it's right, but we are saying we need to look at the context, and that we come from we've got a history of institutional violence. We look at all the crime that we've got, the overall levels of crime and violence. But then we also need to look at, and I'm not even going to talk about it right now, but interpersonal violence. And I mean, for many men, I'm actually going a little bit off here, but we look at gender, that the magnitude of the problem is huge. But what it will require, in the corner there you'll see, is that it requires a whole of society approach. So we need to just understand that and recognize it in context here, that we can't blame men, we can't look at them as bad, and we need to understand that there's a whole lot that has contributed to getting us to be in the situation that we find ourselves today. So I think that what we want to do is the alarming lack of accountability for perpetration of GBV by individuals. We want to look at the systemic inadequacies that result in the levels of vulnerability and a lack of safety, the largely ineffective and insensitive response to the needs of survivors and those working to support them. There's historic and collective trauma, and a strengthened emphasis to coherently and comprehensively respond to the social norms, inequalities, and structural drivers. And those things are really important because we cannot look at these things in isolation any longer. And then a deeper understanding of the scale and nature. So here I've got some of the different types of gender-based violence. And when I originally started this, there was 4: the physical abuse, the emotional, sexual, and economic. And then I looked at Mosaic's website and I found spiritual and cultural abuse. And that's what I'm talking about, the change, that things are not quite as in the old days like it used to be. And we need to really understand it. So the physical abuse is quite a simple one. We understand that quite easily. You'll see somebody with a blue eye. The emotional, the verbal, and the psychological abuse, and that can come in all different forms. Sexual harassment is one of them. And I mean, for very many people in workspaces, in work environments, that's where that is experienced also quite a lot. You get it in the household, you get it in the marriage, when those husbands psychologically abuse you and not want you to go out, and you're stuck in the house, and you can't go anywhere, and you can just go to the shop and buy groceries and come home. It affects you psychologically. So that is a form of abuse. But for many, they think that it's acceptable and they think that it's normal, and they'll think that the person loves them. The sexual harassment, that's complex, and I also can't, this particular slide is a training all on its own. Because one needs to understand it, and there are very many different examples. I know somebody that was a domestic worker, and the person, the lady of the house, father used to come and visit, and he was abusing this young girl by telling her she's got lovely young legs, and he'd really like to, he doesn't have sex with his wife any longer, and she felt incredibly uncomfortable. Yet nothing was done about it, because it was a boss and she couldn't really do anything. And when she did try to address it, the boss had said to her, but we all experience that kind of thing when we're young. You must just accept it. So it affects one psychologically, and you don't even realize it. So sexual harassment is a completely something that we need to talk about all on its own. In fact, we almost had a dialogue just to discuss that in the workplace, because that is so prevalent as well in the workplace. And women are affected, and even some men are affected, because women can also be the abusers. So it's just to be very mindful that there's that as well. Then the sexual abuse, we all know that's fairly straightforward. The economic abuse is the one where they start using money and holding it against, or keeping it back from you, or telling you, I'm not going to give you money. And so you feel trapped in the relationship. And that's why that 5th pillar spoke about the economic empowerment, because that is an area that women get stuck in and they can't leave. The spiritual and cultural abuse, that's a fairly new one, but it's also something that is almost quite subtle at times. Spiritual abuse is when they also use the Bible, or they use religion. I also just want to say up front here that this is not my opinion. I'm actually just talking about what I understand around the Constitution and what the Constitution would want us to all do, and that is to just be respectful. So when it comes to religion, they will use religion, and with culture, they will have I forget the term now, but there's a term where they do the genital mutilation as well. I don't know the other word, but so that's examples of abuse. So these are the different types. I also put this slide up because I think it's important that we just talk a little bit and understand the different, when we talk about the LGBTQIA plus community. And I think I just want to share a personal experience. I mean, as a young child, I was raised as a Catholic, and I grew up believing that gay people, it's not normal and it's not right. So as a child, that's what I was taught to believe. And then I started doing NGO work, and I would go to all these conferences and things. And I was sitting there, and I must have been about 25. And I'm sitting at this conference, and this man talks about how his partner was stoned to death. And I looked at this person and I thought, in what world do I think that this is okay, that you stone someone to death because of who they choose to love? And it's almost like the scales came off my eyes in that moment. But for 25 years, I believed that, because it was what I was taught. So I think that in that moment, I just realized one needs to be respectful, because who made me, God, to make a decision around what somebody chooses to do? Whether it's right or wrong, I don't know. I really will never know that. But I just know that I need to be respectful of individuals. I also realized that as I was talking about how I felt, because I found out that my cousin was gay, and I thought, oh dear, what do I do now? But I realized that the more I speak about the things that are challenging and difficult, the prejudice dissipates. And I think that that was important for me and my own growth and development around understanding the LGBTQI community. We talk about transgender, and then there's queer, you get the intersex, and you get the asexual. And it's just important that we understand that there's that plus at the end there. So it means that it may not be the end. The kind of change that is required is that we really need to look at the individual, the family, relationships, children, but that whole of society needs to be involved in this complex pandemic called gender-based violence. So it's not going to just be one person that's going to be able to make that change, but we all need to look at how we collectively play a role. I'm not going to go through these slides because that's the same around the pillars, but I do want us to get into groups now, and I want you to start thinking about these 6 pillars that I've just spoken to you about. So how do you think you can contribute to the successful implementation of the NSP, bearing in mind the 6 pillars? And I've just listed them there. And if not, wherever you find yourself, I want to understand what are the challenges that would prevent you from making a contribution to the reduction of GBV. So can we do that group session again, please, Nahankla?
I don't know if my group was the only one, but we didn't have the pillars. So I think very few of us even remembered all of them. I think we spoke about accountability, that's all. Yeah, so I think if there is a slide to, you know, something specific we need to talk about, that's part of the presentation. If it can't be shared within the groups, then it might be advisable just to give the participants a chance to maybe take a picture, you know, of the slide on their phones. So when we go into the breakaway sessions, then we have that little, you know, frame of reference that we can refer to when we're conversing.
Thank you.
Because we had nothing, so it was awkward.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, Tebogo. I mean, I think that I was in one group and they also couldn't remember all the pillars. So yeah, now I know that for next time to tell you to take a picture before you go into your breakout rooms. But I am sure that many of you did speak at least even about the one pillar that you did remember. So would any of you like to share?
Sorry, Colleen, I was in breakaway room 4. I'm not sure if there was a problem with my computer, but we didn't have any discussion. I didn't hear anything. No one was saying anything in my room. So I was not sure if I was in the wrong group or was there just an audience technical issue?
Hi, Shirin. I really can't tell you, because Nahankla is busy with the groups. So she might be able to answer that one.
Hi, yes, Colleen. We did chat a little around the impact that these are having on kids in school in our group. But I did write a question in the chat earlier, and I see the whole chat from the previous discussion is completely disappeared. In the beginning, when you presented the 7 pillars, you started off with the accountability and leadership, and then the role that SAPS has to play. And my question is around, you know, if we are meant to be holding our leaders accountable, how do we as the community go about doing that? Because here we have the opportunity with educators who are going to empower kids and support them and teach them to be respectful and say that, you know, if you experience these things, speak up. But on the very few percentage of women and children who do speak out, the current policies that are in place and the current laws are failing them. So what do we do as a community to actually hold people accountable?
Yeah, it's not a question per se, but I did put on the chat, you know, like the person that has just spoken was saying, I think the country is also failing us, you know, people get abused and people get arrested, then you hear people complaining that the perpetrator is being seen walking free the next day on the street. So I think also the laws of the country must seem to be working. People that do wrong, they must go and face the night of the prison. and not go and enjoy the comfort of being kept away, and then few months down the line they come back. So yeah, I want to talk about the government taking more responsibilities in terms of tightening the measures to deal with. And if there is any other country that we can learn from, you know, let's share those experiences if you have any. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that, Maureen. That's also been very useful. Okay. I mean, I think, Jerusa, with your question, how do we hold community, how do we hold the leaders accountable? That is in itself a really huge challenge, because that's become what we recognize as the big problem. Police SAPs have not been very cooperative, and women are almost reluctant to go there because they don't feel that they're going to get the service that they want. So just a little bit of an update in terms of, I think what we need to do is we need to try to make sure that we can localize the problem of GBV and to create local forums. Now, at a national level, there's a national GBV forum. Then you have a provincial GBV forum. And I think that what becomes important is that we start having local forums where people can actually get involved, where we can listen to the issues, but there must be some feedback mechanism where it can be reported. And I think that that's why the local initiatives are going to be that important. I just give you an example. When Minister, as we have this transversal group, but so we need to make sure that the feedback goes from the bottom to the top. And that is what we find is very lacking. Like that question that you're asking doesn't only affect pillar 1, it affects pillar 6 in terms of research and information management, because that's where we're picking up what the challenges are. So when Minister and when people, and I attend the provincial meeting, but when you go there, then you must be able to say, these are the challenges we're experiencing in Steenberg or in Athlone, and so that they can tell us, now, what are you going to do about it? And how are you going to give us feedback around what has been done differently? So it's easy for me to say, but I think unless we start localizing the issues and making sure we put a system in place to get it addressed at the top, nothing's going to change. And we need to be some monitoring.
How does one do that? What you're saying, how do we localize it? How do we get our concerns across? Because I have concerns around DNA testing, and I've contacted sub-council. They've told me that it can only be taken up on a provincial level. So it seems like what you're talking about now in terms of communicating the channel up, how does one go about doing that? How do you actually communicate these things?
Yes, I mean, I do think presently the DSD, we are trying to create the localized forums, but it's not going to be something that we can do. Communities have to almost initiate it themselves. So all depends which area. If you're in the Western Cape, I would possibly be able to tell you who the person is that you could contact and that there might be a local forum. But if you're not in the Western Cape, it would be a little bit more difficult for me to do. Are you in the Western Cape?
Yes, I'm in the Western Cape.
Which area?
In Milnerton.
Okay, so that would be which office? Let me think now. But I'll work it out. But there is a way. So I will take your details, Jerusa, at the end. If you can just put your contact details in, and then I will contact you about that. But there definitely are ways. It's just about making sure that we start localizing it and getting that information so that we can send it up.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Thanks so much, Colleen.
Okay.
Colleen, I think Renee Swanepoel has hands up.
Okay, Renee, go.
Hi, everybody. Just speaking to that question as well, in our group, we did discuss that there seems to be a big disjoint between sort of, if you look at the higher structures, you know, the enforcement of legislation, you know, enforcement of the rules, and then on that micro level, what's happening in your community, what's happening in your homes. There seems to be, you know, everyone's working on their own little thing, but nobody's really working, you know, to support maybe all of those pillars. And that's maybe something that one would look at. But also then just to address our previous question, as an example, what we've done where I live is everybody that lives in our streets has set up a WhatsApp group. And we also have our community policing forum people on the group, as well as our local police station representative. And it's actually been working beautifully, because if anyone notices anything or anything's out of place, you know, someone just pops it on the group. Hi guys, I can hear a woman shouting. Is everything okay? You know, so we have a lot of awareness in our street, and you might not know all the people in your street, you know, you've maybe not met them, but we're all on a group together. And in that way, you start small, and that's where communities can start helping each other, I think, just as a practical way.
Okay, Renee, I actually really like that. Now, it's those kinds of things. Now, you can see they're just having this conversation, and we only got an hour and a half to have this conversation, which doesn't give us much time, but we can see that one can get information and ideas from just exchanging and talking to each other. And that's an important place to start. And you are so right when you say that everything seems to be disjointed. And I think it was Maureen that spoke about earlier, and she said that we need to be empowering people. We need to start getting the information out so that people can understand. And I'm sure just by the simple presentation that I've done around the NSP, you can almost see what must happen and how disjointed it is. So it's about looking at what we can start doing practically ourselves, where we find ourselves at, that can start making the difference. And your example of the WhatsApp groups is one such example. And there are very many other hotlines and numbers that one can call. And that's another workshop possibly where one could go through all of that. We could get someone from our victim empowerment program to do a presentation around all the details, the actual, you know, if you want more specific details. I'm just generally giving an overview. And I also just need to, I'm very mindful that I've got 20 minutes left. And there is still another piece of the presentation, which I think is quite important to share as well. So if I can just do that next piece of the presentation, we can go back to Q&A. Will that be all right with everyone? So Western Cape government has got an implementation plan. So we now know what the national strategic plan is, and it will be pointless to come up with the same thing, because all we do is we'll just say this is what the province is going to do and use exactly the same pillars. So what we've done in the Western Cape government is we actually decided, okay, so the plan, the intention of the plan is exactly the same thing as the national plan. But what we do is it's for the 2021-22 financial year, and it focuses on all women across the life cycle, children, including the boy child, because the boy child is incredibly important. And I think one person mentioned it in one of the group sessions, and they spoke about boys and how they were raised. And that is so important, because you start already when they're born. You put that girl in pink, you put that boy in blue. And in that process, you start developing gender norms and what's expected from boys and what's expected from girls. And in that process, they start having an identity and believing that that's the only way. And now we talk about something also where we're trying to do a lot of work around toxic masculinity, because the things that you were taught as a boy and as a young man is not necessarily the right thing or the right way. And it's about how do we start almost dissecting and start looking at that more deeply to understand what we could possibly do differently. I just want to give you an example. It's nice when you can give your own examples. It just makes it easier. But I have two sons. And so when they were small and I was doing gender training when they were small, I remembered about this blue and pink, and now you can just, the gender norms, that I used to walk behind my babies as they were growing up, and they take the socks and they take the underpants and they get into the bath. And I used to just pick all these things up. And then I stopped one day and I realized, oh, Colin, this is not something that you need to do. They can actually pick it up themselves. Because when the boys are men and they're in their 20s, the mothers are still picking up the socks and underpants for them. And so when they get wives, they think that that's what wives are supposed to be doing. And then there are women now that know that actually a career is something that I can be focusing on and not being just a housewife. So we can start unlearning and start thinking through different ways of behaving so that boys don't still believe that women are expected to do have a particular role and function in society. And likewise, the same for men. They don't all need to be the breadwinners, because women can be breadwinners as well. In fact, most women are breadwinners. So it's about looking at how do we go back to basics of gender 101 in order to start changing this problem that we find called GBV. And then also just to say that we can't look at GBV in isolation. So in the Western Cape, and I think it's just important, man, because people living in the Western Cape don't see what their role as a citizen or as a teacher or as a learner is in this big plan that the Western Cape government might have. So in the Western Cape government, there's the Western Cape Provincial Strategic Plan. Then also you hear them talking a lot now about the Western Cape Safety Plan. And that is how do we make sure that the people in the Western Cape feel safer? And so the Western Cape Gender-Based Violence Implementation Plan is linked to that. The NSP's pillars as well as the strategic plan. So that is how it's supposed to all come together in the Western Cape. And I'm sorry, other provinces, I can't speak for any of you around that. But I think in principle, the NSP is hoping that all the provinces would come up with something that works for a particular province. And so this is how ours works for us. Yeah, I'm not going to do that slide. But I think now coming back to that first question is about how do we nurture that respect? I think this is important. We do need to have a sense of belonging. And it's very challenging to make learners feel that they belong in the classrooms, particularly when it comes to concerns learners express that include either their sexual orientation, gender, race, socioeconomic, ethnic, and disability identities. And sense of belonging in the classroom is really important for learner success. And that teachers play an integral part in the environment and the school culture. And so we need to find, and we need to help to find helpful strategies. And the teachers in the room, the educators on the front lines affecting positive change. And we can make that difference by creating a sense of belonging in our classrooms. Because I think for most people, if you don't feel that you belong, you start feeling like you don't have self-esteem, you don't feel like you got much dignity. And so you start behaving and acting out and behaving really badly. Then you get married and the woman earns more money and you start beating her. And it's got nothing to do with her or him, but how you feel inside of yourself. So it's about how do we do that? How do we create that sense of belonging? You must recognize that in the diverse classrooms, and you know, I worked in Lavendale for a long time. And I remember the principal telling me, Colin, you know, in our classrooms, when you're a teacher and you're standing in front there, it feels like waves of learners coming in, 30, 40 children at a time. So it's very, very hard for those teachers, and I absolutely understand that. So don't for a second think that I think that your job is an easy one. It's not, and I know that. But also just to recognize that it's so diverse. Some come from single parent homes, others may not have a history of academic success. They come from different ethnic or language backgrounds, learners' disabilities, or those who identify as LGBTQIA+. So they're marginalized learner populations who shouldn't be on the margins. But if they've been on the margin for so long that they internalize their lack of belonging. The inputs from media and stereotyping and other messages also places them at a disadvantage. So how do we address this lack of belonging? Now, I mean, my answers are simple and it seems simplistic, but it really sometimes is the simple things that can make the difference, which we sometimes can take for granted. So we look at dignity and respect in the classroom. It's about treating each other with dignity and respect. And I think if we can start doing it there, and we need to start, we spoke about accountability as well. It's about we need to start holding each other accountable. And there are different levels to accountability. When that men are sitting at the braai and they're talking about a woman and they're using all derogatory terms and things, you, that one male friend, should be able to say, and I'm taking it at one of you in the room here today, that's going to say, no, man, it's not funny actually calling women, whatever they're calling women or talking about women that way. And if one person does it, that conversation or that laughter at that braai may stop. And that's your start of how to change the conversation. So it's in the small spaces where we find ourselves that we can actually make a difference. It's about that mother who's encouraging that husband who's abused, not a husband, yeah, that might be a husband or a boyfriend, and he's having sex with a child. It's about calling that mother to account to say, no, man, this is not okay, you know? And so we don't do it, and they'll say, I remember Minister uses this quite often, and she uses the term, and she says, ons praat nie uit die huis uit nie. So people do that all the time as well, and that's not okay. So we need to start holding people accountable for behavior when we see it not right. Okay, so we talk about dignity and respect, listening to each other's points of view, and recognizing that there may be disagreement because we don't all agree on the same things. But it's about creating spaces where we can learn to engage and to not agree, but yet to be respectful. And then just to keep the discussions and comments on the topic and of the people. And this, it sounds really simplistic when I say you do not use inflammatory or offensive language or sarcasm, but if we just do those simple things and we start thinking more respectfully, things can change. And I know it sounds really simple. The other thing as teachers and educators, it's about honoring commitments, demonstrating sincere interest. So when we talk about wanting to start something in our schools or in our schooling community or in our communities around GBV, we must be sincere, because too often, and there by number 4 I've got, persisting through obstacles and developing trust, is that if you come up with something that you want to do, people start many new things and then they stop. So it's about how can I trust you to want to do something if I can't, if you don't carry out and go ahead with what you want to do. And finding opportunities and events that really mean a lot to your learners. Sometimes it's you that wants the things, but not what the learners want. So it's about taking time to listen. And we don't always do that. Let learners and teachers who are interested in the topic become the drivers of conversations, because I think it's important that we don't do things for the wrong reasons. And if GBV really interests you, and if you really feel that you want to be part of a community that talks about GBV or start a forum, a local forum around GBV, then that's okay. And we mustn't exclude boys from the conversation because gender is not about women. We must arrange topics for discussion and then you can get introduction started. I just put some ideas here on what can be done. And ask for assistance from experts. And I put experts in brackets, and that's so funny because Jessica, you said I'm an expert, I'm not. But it's about finding those experts, maybe an NGO like Triangle that's got experience around the LGBTQI community. They can come and give a talk, or finding somebody that can talk about the shelters and what they can do. That's an expert. So it's about finding the right people to talk about the particular topic that you are interested in. It's also about prioritizing high quality teacher-learner relationships, being sensitive to learners' needs and emotions. And GBV, I just want to tell you, it's an incredibly emotive topic. And I can talk about it in an hour and a half and make it seem quite simple. But for some people in this room, you may be or may have experienced GBV, and it will be emotive for you, and you will leave here having opened up some wounds or something. So just bear in mind that anything around GBV can be quite emotive, and just to be mindful of that. And it's always about getting learners buy-in. I think that too often it's things that we want and not what the learners want. But I think I just want to touch on something that, on work that I've done. And I think it's important that I just want to share this with you, man. We need to understand, if we want to see transformation, we need to start looking at what is going on in that community. And presently you'll see that the community almost feels quite stuck. So it's about how do you restore people to start feeling hopeful and feeling worth, and to feel like they belong, and to eventually get, and I'm not even going to go through all these numbers because I'm running out of time, but to get to a transforming community. And I think that there's a thing that we really take for granted, and I'm really just throwing out a whole lot of stuff as best I can, but at least if nothing else, we will leave your thinking today. So I think that the art of conversation is quite important, because when we talk with the intention of replying. We don't actually have a conversation where we do these 4 things. And if you actually look at these 4 points that I've put here, and I've got it in red alert so we can all remember it, but we need to listen to what the person is saying. We need to check and inquire if what we really heard is what they said, because sometimes, just like our eyes have a lens, so do our ears. So we will hear what we want to hear. So it's about really just checking, did I really hear what that person said? Or am I just thinking, hey, that's Colin, she's a woman, I'm actually not going to listen to her. Or that's a man, I don't think I want to even listen to what he's got to say. So it's about making sure we check that what they said is really what they said and not what we wanted to hear. We need to think about what they just said. So it's about taking the time to reflect, and then you talk. Now you can see, just as I explained that to you, that it took a little bit of a process going on in one's head. And there's no process when we have conversations just generally. We move straight from listening to talking. And I think that if we just take the time to do this differently, then that can also make all the difference in the kind of conversations we have around GBV. And you will hear very many different things coming up and very many different opinions. So if nothing else today, we're just starting a conversation around how do we engage more respectfully around the issue of GBV, and what can we do as individuals to try to change the way we understand GBV. Now, this question that I put up here, I'm not wanting you to answer it in the group, but I do, and you can take a picture of this, everybody who's got cell phones, but I do want to leave you with this set of questions. The first question is GBV and femicide worthy of our collective action? That's the first question. And the second question is, how do we deepen the quality of contact we make with each other around GBV? And how do all the gifts of those present get brought to the table? Everybody in this room, every one of us is sitting with some gift and some skill that we've got. So is there anything that you've got? And how do all the gifts of all of those present get brought together to the table? And that talks to the coordination that is in pillar 1, because we've all got something to offer. And how do we try to work out how we can do that differently? So I think on that note, that is all that I've got to say around GBV and how to create a different way of working and thinking about GBV. And I think we've got 5 more minutes, and I'm going to just give you some time to share anything you might want to say or ask me. Thank you.